Just like running water, wind discriminates also based on particle size. And so fine-grained sediments, fine materials are more capable of being held aloft, suspended, whereas coarser ones are our sands and our gravels and our rocks and boulders are obviously going to be less likely to be carried aloft. And so one of the key ideas we got working on is the silts and the clays are more likely to be held aloft, whereas sand, more kind of characteristic as far as bouncing along the bottom, and our gravel, of course, even more difficult to move along, almost kind of get scooted along, a lot like the Kootenai River video, the bedload that we looked at beforehand. And so the idea here we're going to be working with is this different size sediments we're going to see aloft. So similar to fluvial processes, the sand grains kind of bounce against other sand grains, bounce against other chunks of gravel, and it's like sandpaper, help to round down these structures to nice, soft, round features. And more of the same, so here's another way to show the sand grains bouncing up into other sand grains. But like I said, the smaller grain sediments, the dust, the silts and the clays, are going to be more characteristic being held aloft and, of course, carried further distances. And in more of the same, but the idea, of course, that we have smaller grain sediments are going to be more characteristic of being held aloft, but also carried further distances. Now let's take these words, put them to text. So transportation distance, sediment travels based on sediment size. And so to use a key term, a good example of a fill-in-the-blank answer would be dust storm. And dust storm is essentially suspension of finer particles over long distances, and of course our silts and clays, not so much our sands and gravels, are going to be carried further distances. And so dust storms we associate with silts and clays. And so there are situations where a sandstorm can occur, but it's much more likely that whenever there is something perceived to be a sandstorm, it's probably more likely to be a silt or clay storm, thus a dust storm. But there are instances in the Middle East where they do have sandstorms. But anyway, so there's one period of time in the U.S. of A., the 1930s, which if I was there in class right now, I'd ask you if that was a good or bad time for us, and it was for the most part a bad time, thus the name, the Great Depression. So one of the byproducts of that was people moved out to the Great Plains, and so one of the safe industries to get involved in would be definitely agriculture, grazing, very much land-intensive industries. And so what people did was they pretty much agriculturalized everything they could possibly, anything that could be grazed, anything that could be agriculturalized would be. So one of the things that ended up happening was we had increased erosion. So you had areas that were quite dry in which people were trying to turn into ag, removing the vegetation, and what that did was combined with a period of drought, high pressure that predominated, thus preventing rain, caused then a massive windstorm, which also was occurring at the same time, which then triggered the Dust Bowl, in which the entire areas of northern New Mexico, eastern New Mexico, the Panhandle of Texas, western Oklahoma, parts of Nebraska were essentially just covered in dust. Images to show this in the following slides. And what this did was this triggered a mass migration of people moving out to the West Coast. And so there's some movies, some books, some songs that are all associated with this Dust Bowl. I believe if you're Merle Haggard fans, Okie from Muskogee is about people who moved from the Dust Bowl. I got some novels that we'll talk about on future slides. So here is the dust storm during the Dust Bowl years of the 1930s, and so this is an image, and this isn't a photoshopped image. This is just strictly what people would have seen in this area of. I believe this picture's from Texas, Panhandle, Texas, and so obviously this would cause a mass migration if essentially your whole home, your whole neighborhood covered in soot. And here's the epicenter of the Dust Bowl in this area of extreme northeastern New Mexico, Panhandle, Texas, Oklahoma. And this, once again, there's a high pressure just dominated for a couple of years, dried everything out, combined with a large windstorm. And we know how things go from west to east in this pretty much this area of the country, and so then this became a bigger issue for people in Nebraska. People further outside to the north and the east of this red circle then had to deal with the Dust Bowl. And so once again we get the idea of a local problem becomes regional when we combine the influences of fluvial and Aeolian processes. And I can't read, so I don't know what these books are about, but allegedly they're both about the Dust Bowl. So there you go. Like I said, I can't read, so pause this, read, take a look at the photo.